Welcome to the Steel Curtain Podcast. It's Monday, August 26th, and the Pittsburgh Steelers finished the NFL preseason 0-3 after a 24-17 loss to the Detroit Lions on Saturday afternoon at Ford Field. I'm Josh Yourish, and today I'm going to be joined by my fellow Steel Curtain Podcast hosts, Jaggi and Shayne Kubas, to predict who's going to lead the Steelers through the air, on the ground, and on defense. But before we get to that, we have to start with the QB battle that never was. Russell Wilson is the starting quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers. That'll be the case at least for week 1 of the NFL season. Now, Mike Tomlin hasn't said that so explicitly, but he made it pretty known on Saturday. After playing just one series and going 2 for 2 for 26 yards, both passes to George Pickens on a drive that led to a quick touchdown, Russell Wilson was removed from preseason game number 3 and replaced by Justin Fields. Fields then played 3 series, went 3 of 4 for 40 yards, 2 sacks, 1 fumbled snap. It was a shotgun snap, so it wasn't his fault. And then it was the Kyle Allen and John Reese Plumlee show. After the game, Mike Tomlin said a QB decision will come, quote, at the end of the work week, end quote. No, it won't, because it already came. Everybody already knows what Steelers reporters and anyone around the team has been saying for a long time. Russell Wilson is the starting quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And now the national media that wanted there to be a quarterback controversy in Pittsburgh, and frankly, I'm with them. I wanted a quarterback controversy too because I prefer Justin Fields, and you know that about me, is acting like they've been duped by Tomlin. But we know that this is how he does business. And that's why the local media is taking their victory lap right now. They're saying, we knew this. We aren't surprised by how Tomlin's doing this. This is how the Steelers do business. Of course, Russell Wilson's the starting quarterback. Yeah, that doesn't mean it's a good thing. That doesn't mean that Tomlin conjuring up a quarterback battle when there isn't one is a good way to handle the quarterback position. There was never an open competition. That was never the case. Justin Fields had no chance to win the starting quarterback job. If he had, maybe he would have, because we didn't see anything from Wilson that shows that he is the Russell Wilson of old. It makes sense to start Wilson in week 1. I'm not saying it doesn't. It's easier to bench Wilson for Fields and start your Super Bowl winning quarterback than to do it the other way around. Russell Wilson is potentially a Hall of Famer regardless of what he does in Pittsburgh. It's a lot easier for your team, your organization, everything to start Russell Wilson in week 1, see how it goes. If it goes poorly, you can go to the young guy who you just are saying needed a little bit of time to develop, needed some time on the sidelines to see things, to see how Russell Wilson operates, to learn. That makes all the sense in the world. So then why are we acting like there's a quarterback battle? Because all that happened now is Justin Fields lost a quarterback battle. You know, the young quarterback that, yeah, it's a late round pick, but that you invested in and brought in. Now it looks like he lost a quarterback battle that never even happened because Tomlin wanted to play it up and treats the quarterback position like any other position. And I talked with Brian Batko a while back when he came on the show, and he was the one who asked Mike Tomlin a question about handling the quarterback position. And Tomlin said, I'm not going to back myself in the corner. I've been doing this for too long. And Batko said to me, yes, he's been doing NFL head coach for a long time. He hasn't been doing developmental quarterback for a long time. He hasn't been doing quarterback battle for a long time. He had Ben Roethlisberger for most of his career. And the few instances we've seen from Mike Tomlin handling a quarterback situation haven't gone very well. He messed up Kenny Pickett's development. That is true. Kenny Pickett was never going to be an NFL quarterback. There was never going to be that much development there. But throwing Kenny Pickett into the second half of a game against the Jets with the Bills looming on the schedule because there was a fight in the locker room at halftime or an argument or whatever is a terrible way to handle a quarterback situation. And he also sent Kenny Pickett into that training camp under the pretense of a quarterback battle, and it was one that never existed. That job was always going to be Mitch Trubisky's job. And so Kenny Pickett lost a quarterback battle that never was, the same way Justin Fields lost a quarterback battle that never was. Now, if that's enough to derail your quarterback development, your development as an NFL player, then you are probably never going to be a great NFL player to begin with. Understandable. But if you're a third round pick like Mason Rudolph coming into a pretty toxic quarterback situation because Ben Roethlisberger, the future Hall of Famer and face of the franchise, is unhappy that that Mason Rudolph was selected at all, especially with a third round pick, that's a situation that Mike Tomlin needs to handle better. And he didn't. And eventually he got a chance to evaluate Mason Rudolph, and that didn't go out either. He ended up playing Duck Hodges, and obviously Mason Rudolph getting hit on the head with his own helmet by Myles Garrett certainly didn't help things in his development that season. And eventually it was the right decision to go to Duck Hodges if you wanted to win games that year. But you needed to see what you had in Rudolph. And if you had seen enough to go to Duck Hodges, then get Rudolph out of the organization after that year instead of letting him linger and cause even more problems when it's Trubisky and Pickett. Mike Tomlin is a great NFL coach. He's a very consistent NFL coach. He hasn't won a playoff game in a really long time. It's hard to full-throated say great. He is an incredibly consistent NFL head coach, but handling the quarterback position has never been his strong suit. And if that's the case for this organization in a position where it needs to find or develop a quarterback, then how much longer can you keep Mike Tomlin as the head coach of that organization? Most coaches only get one chance to get it right with the quarterback position. Between Rudolph and Pickett, Tomlin's on number 3, maybe even number 4 with Fields and Wilson. And it doesn't seem like he's getting it right this time either. Staging a phony quarterback battle is not a great way to start. And with that, let's go to a quick ad read before we bring on Tommy Jaggi and Shayne Kubas. If you're a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers or Pittsburgh Steelers football, we would love you to subscribe to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We really appreciate the support. And now, time to bring on Tommy and Shayne. Guys, welcome to the show. And before we get to the convoluted draft that I have devised in my head, that Shayne has already been a part of one of these little drafts before. Tommy, this will be your first. Before we get to that, the quarterback battle is a hot topic, but so is Broderick Jones. And Tommy, you did some great stuff on Twitter this morning breaking down his play. It was a better performance in pass protection. The run game, not so much. What did you see from Broderick Jones, and what are your feelings about him after preseason game number 3?
Yeah, Josh, well, let's start with the positive here. The pass protection was definitely the best of the 3 games in the preseason for Broderick. It still wasn't great. Like, there were still things that I was looking for. Like, I want to see that arm extension. I want to see some pop upon contact there, and we weren't getting that still. Like, he was in the right position this time at least, so that wasn't an issue. The run blocking was really rough, and if you want to see some ugly reps, go look at some of my posts on Twitter this morning. Jones was I was kind of sluggish off the ball. He allowed his man to move laterally on him just way too easily, and so these guys are getting scot-free, basically, path to the ball carrier, and Jones is doing nothing to disrupt that. And so I don't know what's going on. Like, this does not look like the same player that we watched and were optimistic about last year. But the run blocking was really bad. Pass blocking was better in this game. Collectively, this performance was probably the best of his 3 still. Although it's a very low bar, but just not a lot to get excited about heading into the season.
Shayne, I'll ask you now. Broderick Jones didn't slide over to left tackle right away once Dan Moore Jr. came out of the game. What do you make of that?
I still just don't really understand what their vision for this player is at this point, because Tommy and I have talked about it a lot, going back to last year when he was inserted at right tackle. instead of Dan Moore moving positions. And apparently, as I've said over and over again, apparently he just doesn't know how to play right tackle, which I know not everybody can make that transition. But if he's unplayable at right tackle, then maybe he just doesn't need to play football for us. Like, it's just kind of, I hate to say that. If you're going to be a swing tackle,
Fully agree.
like, especially because he's supposed to be the swing tackle at some point, right? Like, that's the idea. Well, if you only can play one side, you're not a swing tackle. You're just a backup left tackle. Like, that's.
And then why didn't the Steelers bring in an additional tackle to be the swing tackle if that's the case?
Ideally,
but go ahead.
But no, that's my point. Is I don't really know what the thinking is with this player at this point, because clearly moving him around is influencing his play, because this was a player, especially in the run game, that was very good last year, really, like especially for a rookie tackle, because of his size, athleticism, his ability to get on the move and bury guys. Like, that was what he was kind of billed as coming out too, where the pass protection was good, but did have some areas he needed to improve in. But as run blocker, he was going to be day one ready to go. And that's what we got, right? And now all of a sudden you have him in the preseason playing against backups in a lot of the case, and he can't run block against some of these guys. Clearly there's something going on there that isn't just his physical ability, because we know what that is supposed to be. You need to, at some point this season moving forward, if you want to make this pick look good, he has to play one tackle spot and play there consistently. Now, obviously, he's a guy that can move sides because he's athletic enough to do that, but he needs to get good enough at one to be allowed to play the other one at some point. Like, that's what it comes down to. And I think it should be left tackle, because Fatanu, I think, can play right tackle. He is such an experienced, put together player that has all the skills you need to be a pass protector from either side. I think he can handle that very easily compared to a Broderick, who doesn't have nearly as many snaps played in his career at either tackle spot. So stick him at left tackle where you're supposed to play. Let him go through his lumps. And if he isn't the guy, then fine, he isn't the guy. But you have to find that out. And switching him from right to left is not finding that out.
Tommy, I think we all know what we want the starting offensive line to look like in week one, with Broderick Jones at left tackle and Troy Fautanu at right. What do you think it will look like? Because I'm getting more and more nervous that Dan Moore Jr. is going to be the starting left tackle, and Broderick Jones is going to find his way onto the bench in week one of his second NFL season.
Yeah, Josh, I think you can take that to the bank. I really do. I mean, the fact that Broderick exited the preseason finale, he exited the final game of the preseason without taking a snap at left tackle. He played 20 snaps at right tackle, Gonzo, and then Devery Hamilton's in there playing left tackle. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, Dan Moore left the game. What an opportunity for you to slide over there, get the work on the side that you are intended to play, with Fautanu being declared the right tackle reportedly.
Yeah.
So it's going to be Dan Moore at left tackle. Unfortunately, you're going to have a lineup of Dan Moore at left tackle, Isaac Seumalo at left guard, Zach Frazier at center, James Daniels at right guard, and then Fautanu at right tackle, assuming that he's healthy. If not, Broderick will plug in at right tackle for now, because apparently that's how the Steelers view him. And Jones will be the guy off the bench. Unfortunately, this is something that this team does. They value veteran seniority and leadership more than they should. Like, and we've seen this, the examples of it last year. Levi Wallace played and started until Joey Porter took over after the bye week. Same with
Levi
Patrick
Wallace
Peterson.
didn't just play. He made me physically ill every time he played.
Yeah,
Levi
was
Wallace
so rough to watch.
Was atrocious.
Somehow he was worse as a run defender than he was in coverage last year too.
It got to a point where I felt bad for him, because I'm like, why are you letting him go out there and put this tape out there? Like, why are you what is the point of this? Who's helped by this?
Continue, Tommy.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like Larry Ogunjobi doubled the snaps of Keanu Benton last year for what reason at all? And then you have Broderick going back to last year, and Broderick was encouraging. And like Shayne said, especially as a run blocker, which is surprising why he's performing so bad as a run blocker this preseason. But he didn't get to play because, I mean, you waited until like disciplinary measures for Chuck
Chooks had to say
last
some
year.
crazy stuff apparently.
Yeah, and that's what ultimately did it for him to get into the lineup. So I don't know how much longer it would have taken other than that. But going back to Broderick one more time here, the one word I would use to describe his preseason performance, other than any derogatory word that you could use, is passive. Like it was just a passive play. Like there was no aggressiveness at all, which is part of what makes him the player that he is when he's good. Mm-hmm. But even like in some of these run block fits, like he was passive. One cut up in particular, I'm like, did he genuinely not know if this was a run or a pass? Because it looked like he was dropping back in a pass that everybody else is pushing up against the line of scrimmage. They're putting a hat on a hat. and they're hitting somebody, and Broderick is kind of just sitting back on his toes, waiting for the guy to come to him. Like, do you not know what's going on out there? Or are you just really passive all of a sudden this year?
My favorite cut up that you tweeted this morning was on the Fields sweep to the left near the goal line when Broderick Jones let his defender just run right past him and make a play on what should have absolutely been a touchdown. If Jones had, it's so stark, and everyone should go watch it, because it's not just that he allowed the tackle to happen. It's that if he slowed him down at all, it's a touchdown. Got in the way even 1%. If Broderick Jones fell down in the path of where the play was going and the defender simply had to jump over him, that would have been enough time for Justin Fields to score a touchdown. That's how bad it was in the run game, and I really appreciate your work on that on Twitter. If Broderick Jones is going to have to work his way into the lineup, what is your confidence level, Shayne, that he will be a viable starting NFL left tackle at any point in his career, like 1 to 10?
I mean, I think at this point I'd have to put a smack in the middle at 5, because I think there's equally issues from him and equally issues from the team at this point, where like I'm seeing stuff from him where, and I think unfortunately part of it is confidence, right? Because he's not sure at this point what his position is. Frankly, I don't think he knows exactly what they want him to be and what he wants to be, because how could he at this point? But I think the especially the passiveness you talked about, Tommy, I think that stems typically, especially in offensive linemen, and especially ones who have shown aggressiveness in the past, it's a lack of confidence in what you're looking at, what you're seeing, what you're doing. Because again, what am I, a right or left tackle? What position am I going to be in the NFL? So there's that element of it. But then also on his end, like his pass protection hasn't really gotten better. His especially like you talked about his hand usage, right, Tommy? Like his ability to get pop with his hands, it just isn't there right now. And if he's saying he's healthy with the elbow thing, I just don't buy that personally. I really don't. I think there's something bad. But like if he is, then that means you're not good right now. Then like that's basically what you're telling us. Like, yeah, I'm just not a good player at this point right now. It's like, okay, well, what are we supposed to do with that, right? Like I don't really know what to tell you. So I have it smack in the middle of 5. I had it closer like 7 or 8 at the end of last year.
That was going to be my follow-up.
Yeah, until he plays a full season at one spot and starts and gets reps, I don't know how we could possibly know either way, and that's why I think you end up with a 5 there for me.
And I didn't prep you guys too much on Broderick Jones talk, but I wanted to ask a couple questions because Tommy did so much good stuff on it this morning.
Yeah, I saw that too.
And I love this conversation because it's probably one of the most important ones. This is a first-round pick.
Yeah.
Just 2 years ago. But now we're going to get into the draft. And there aren't really any Steelers player props out there on the betting market at the moment because they haven't officially named a starting quarterback.
Official announcement, right?
We don't know who's going to be. Who could it be? It'll be Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
But the betting markets are waiting, and understandably so. They don't want to take action uninformed.
Bad business.
So instead of taking over-unders and looking at those betting lines, we're going to do a draft, and it's in 6 categories. You can draft from any category at any point. You're going to get 3 points if you pick the guy who ends up being the leader at the end of the season in one of these categories, and 1 point if you pick the guy who finishes second on the team, not second among the 3 players that we pick. So some of these points could be left out there on the board.
And probably will be.
And probably will be, especially on the defensive categories.
Yeah. Probably.
So the 6 categories we have are passing yardage leader, rushing yardage leader, receiving yards leader, sacks, interceptions, and tackles. And Tommy has the first pick. He can go from anything all over the board. Everything is wide open to you. And obviously, we're doing this to try to get our predictions. We're going to keep score. We're going to check in on this throughout the season, where the standings are looking. But also, we want to see what this team looks like. Yeah. I don't know that you could do this exercise for many teams in the NFL, where it's actually fun at all. Like, oh, the Chiefs passing yardage leader. Oh, I wonder who that's going to be. Receiving yardage leader. I wonder who that's going to be. The Steelers have so much up in the air, especially on offense. And I'll just go through who was the leader in these categories. And some of them I have number 2 and number 3 last season. So passing yardage leader, Kenny Pickett was number 1, Mason Rudolph number 2. Rushing yards, Najee Harris number 1, Jalen Warren number 2, and number 3 was Calvin Austin.
Yeah.
Not one of the quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Fun.
That's fun.
Receiving yardage leader, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, not on the team anymore, and then Jalen Warren third. Sacks, Watt, Highsmith, and then Marcus Golden. Tackles was Elandon Roberts, TJ Watt, and then Minka Fitzpatrick. And interceptions was Patrick Peterson, not on the team anymore. Levi Wallace, not on the team anymore. And DeMonte KZ and Alex Highsmith all tied at 2. So interceptions is going to be crazy.
Yeah.
And who knows what's going to happen there. That'll probably be later in the draft when we're going there. Tommy, where are you going with your first pick?
That's a great question. I think it comes down to 2 categories here. You look at the receiving leader, George Pickens, clear and obvious favorite right now. But it's so easy to go TJ Watt as the sack leader of the Pittsburgh Steelers, assuming he doesn't get injured. My goodness, even if he misses a stretch of like 5 games, this title belongs to him over Highsmith. It really does. Like this, he's led the NFL in sacks 3 times. He has the single season sack record tied with Michael Strahan. I'm going TJ Watt with this. And the reason why I'm choosing that over the receiver category and a guy like George Pickens, just if the Steelers get a Brandon Ayuk in there, that's not so cut and dry anymore. Watt, it is cut and dry. Watt will out sack Alex Highsmith. He'll out sack Nick Herbig, as impressive as he looked this preseason. That title belongs to him. I'm going to assume that Watt plays at least like 11 to 13 games, and that's going to be good enough to get it done. So I'm going to take TJ Watt to lead the Steelers in sacks.
Not much else to talk about there.
Fair enough.
You covered it very well.
Yeah.
That was the 1-1 on my board as well. And injuries really the only thing that could derail it. Shayne, your pick at number 2.
So mine, I also with receiving yards leader, it's really easy to pick George because again, like barring injury, like who in the world other than maybe like a monster Pat Freiermuth season with Arthur, like who else is going to realistically lead the team, right?
And even Pickens last year with the quarterback disaster put up 1,100 yards.
Exactly, yeah. And again, who are you going to target if you're either of these quarterbacks realistically, and when you need to have it, right? So that is where I'm going to go. But there is another one. I'm curious if it's going to be your pick, Josh, that I would also make here if I wasn't confident Pickens was going to be very good again this year. So it will be George, a receiving yards leader. I'd be shocked if there's anybody else. And most of the people that could contend for it, again, would have to have a monster season by their standard or by just the position standard, being the receiver 2 or 3, to unseat him in that spot.
That's exactly how I had the board playing out.
Makes sense.
Exactly what I expected it to be. And that doesn't make it any easier picking at number 3 because the options are interesting. Like you can look at rushing yards and it's Warren, it's Harris. You can look at sacks if you are not expecting a TJ Watt injury, but it is a possibility. But you want to be hunting those 3s out there. So I definitely don't want to pick somebody who is potentially only going to get me 1 point at this point in it. So I have to go Russell Wilson, passing yardage leader.
Okay.
He's the starting quarterback in week 1. He is most likely to start the most games for the Pittsburgh Steelers this year. And that's just enough for me to take the value there.
Fair enough.
Okay.
I also don't want to not get a quarterback because by the time it gets back to me, that could be a bad situation.
That is true. That's fair.
I'm torn between 2, and I could take a free 1 point by taking Justin Fields right now. I'm going to skip on that and go for 3. So I want to lean to the rushing side of things, but I also know this secondary too. And I know Minka Fitzpatrick, when this guy is healthy, and this interceptions are a high variance number. They're different from year to year. I can't see even who's going to be number 2 in that category necessarily, but I know who's going to be number 1 if he plays 17 games and if he's healthy. I would be floored if it was anybody else. I'm going to take Minka for the interception leader.
That is, again, like that. I did have that as one of my next 2 picks, Tommy. So you took one of the 2 from me, and it makes a lot of sense because now you have a true strong safety playing with him, where I think Elliott is good enough to allow him to play his center field role that we all want him to be in, ideally. And as long as he's healthy too, I think that duo is going to be able to be really good. And specifically, Minka will be able to make plays a lot again. So
that seems to be the thought process with the Steelers throughout this offseason is like, we're getting Minka off the line of scrimmage
not 5 yards away from the line.
Yes. The nickel situation worried me, but the reports were that Beanie Bishop is the number 1 slot corner again in practice today. And he confirmed that in the post-practice scrum. And that relieves me a little bit because the Steelers could move Minka down into the slot. Yeah. He can do everything. Yeah. He's best in center field. I like the pick, Tommy.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, Minka had 0 last year, but he also
Yeah.
dealt with a hamstring injury.
Injuries.
I think that's one and done. Like, I don't think that ever happens again in his
He's not
career.
that type of
I
player,
think he's going to get a minimum of 3 picks, which might be good enough to lead the team, honestly. I
it
think
would've
that
been
you're
last
probably
year.
looking in the 4 or 5 range at least.
Yeah, that's what you hope. So for me, my next pick, though, regardless of whether you took Minka, was going to be tackles with Patrick Queen leading the team. He has averaged more tackles per game than anyone last year who led the team, which would have been Roberts with 106. I think he's averaged about 115 tackles a year for the Ravens, and he's going to be on the field more than any other linebacker on this team, I assume. Right, like barring injury, he's not. I don't think he's missed a game in his career, as far as I can remember. I'm pretty sure he's played every game for the Ravens up to this point. So to me, he seems like a lock to lead the team in tackles, assuming health stays intact for him.
Yeah, that feels like a position that the Steelers haven't had in a while where they can
Yeah.
fully rely on somebody to just rack
Be
up
there
tackles
and
in
just
the
be
middle
there.
of the defense. Yeah, because the other people in consideration potentially at that spot are like Minka, because just getting to the next level.
Yeah.
And Minka did lead the team in tackles 2 years ago.
Yeah, with like
when there were
120.
no linebackers
Yeah.
and there was no run defense at all. And he
Right.
was just cleaning things up constantly. I agree with that pick. I think it's a good one. And that brings me to my second one. And I have to do this because I know I'm getting either 3 or 1 here. I feel very confident in that. And since I believe Jaylen Warren is a much better player than Najee Harris, regardless of what the volume is going to be, and regardless of Jaylen Warren hamstring injury in the preseason, I'm taking Jaylen Warren to lead the team in rushing yards.
All right. I understand because he doesn't have to out carry him necessarily to get to that point. Like he could lead the team, even if it's by a little bit, with like 50 less carries, just because of the efficiency you expect from him.
So Tommy, how do you see in the Arthur Smith offense? How do you see the carries getting split? You don't have to reveal where your picks are going necessarily, but this could be a good time to talk about like what this running game is going to look like. Because when I was at training camp, I really liked what I saw from Warren in these outside zone runs, which we're going to see more of in the Arthur Smith thing. But that's not everything we have in an Arthur Smith offense. You can also look at a Derrick Henry comp, and Najee Harris looks a lot more like Derrick Henry than Jaylen Warren does. What do you expect to see from this running game?
I think Warren's the better fit pretty easily in Arthur Smith's offense. And I think maybe that led to the reason to decline the 5th-year option for Najee. And so I would expect Warren to be the better, more efficient player, which is what we saw the last 2 years. Now, Najee is coming off of his best season, but I think that's going to be the case once again. I think that split gets closer to 50-50 this year than ever before, assuming both guys stay healthy. On that train of thought, Josh, I'm going to back clean up here, and I'm going to take Najee.
Yeah,
and the reason why I'm doing it, the guy's never missed a game in his career. And though I do think that Warren is the better overall player than Harris, Najee is the best ability for him is availability. He's always on the field. And so I'm going to go with the 3-point gamble there, assuming that he stays healthier than Warren.
So what specifically about Najee Harris do you feel like makes him not the best fit for the Arthur Smith running game? I feel like we've talked about that a lot, and I kind of agree, but what are the specific things?
I think the biggest thing, Josh, is anytime you're looking at the wide zone, you've got to be able to get east and west in a hurry before you go north and south. It's not just a matter of, it's not a power run scheme where you're just hitting the A gap or the B gap and you're shooting through it as fast as you can. You've got to set your blocks up by going east and west before you can cut it uphill. And that's what makes like a guy like Derrick Henry is so exceptional. You don't see guys this big is able to excel in a wide zone like he does, but he can just turn on the jets so fast and he can blow down the field for 60-yard touchdown runs. That's not in Najee's wheelhouse. He's just not that fast or that quick of a football player. And I don't think the scheme fits to his strengths anymore. I think it's actually worse for him and better for Warren because this is perfect for Warren's skill set.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Shayne, do you have any thoughts on the run game?
I think in general, that's the thinking, right? Is that with Najee, now to his credit, it does look like he's lost some weight and he does look more explosive in the short amount of time we saw him in the preseason. So I think I'm a little less concerned about his ability to at least play at the same level he's played at roughly. But I still think that Warren just is more explosive. And that's the biggest element here with this run game, because if you can get the wide zone to work properly, the idea is once a hole does open up, you have to be able to get through it pretty quickly, right? Because then that's whenever you can break angles and safeties are trying to chase you down the field and you can't catch you. With Henry, he had the build-up speed more so than the short area burst, whereas Warren, I think, has the short area burst. So you have to have one of those two. Warren has enough speed, obviously, too. We've seen it. But if you're not going to be super fast, you have to be super quick. And if you aren't super quick, like a Henry, where he is a bigger player, once you do hit your top speed, you have to run away from people. And Najee doesn't really have either one of those in the way that the Warren has the quickness or Henry has the speed. So he's kind of in the middle between those two, and it's not exactly the best fit for wide zone.
A player like that definitely sounds like somebody that I would want to draft in the first round.
Yeah. So yeah, it's tough, but I do think he'll be better than he was last year. If we stuck him in this offense last year, it would be much worse because I think he's more prepared to play in an offense like this, but still not in the way Warren is.
So Shayne, your next pick?
I'm gonna take a free one because I think I've done pretty good so far, and I'm gonna take Fields here. And in my opinion, and I was gonna tell you this later, so I may have an article for you to throw out at some point soon. I think he's going to get me 3 because I think that he will replace Wilson before the midseason mark. That's my take on that. I think that Wilson will play just fine until like week 6 or 7. I think in week 7 is when we play the Jets, I believe. I think he's going to get absolutely demolished by their defense. He's going to look terrible. And the next week you have a home game against the Giants. They're going to stick Fields in there and ride him to the end of the season. That's my opinion right now. And I might get 3 out of this. We'll see.
That's a great time to gamble on that. I agree.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree that we're going to see 2 quarterbacks this year.
Yeah, it's just when, right?
It's a matter of when.
Yeah.
And Shayne, what do you feel like from what you've seen from Wilson? It's very limited, but also we can go back to the past 2 seasons in Denver. What are the concerns, and do the concerns along the offensive line, which we didn't think the Steelers were going to have coming into the year,
at least this much,
at least to this level, do those concerns like amplify your concerns about Wilson?
I think the biggest problem is that he's not the playmaker that he was in Seattle anymore, and he's not going to be that. And I, you can read it more in the article, and Tommy, I mentioned it in that. He again, as great of a player as he was with the Seahawks, he kind of was his own offense, where he was scrambling around, opening up throwing lanes, throwing the ball down the field a lot, not really using the middle of the field a ton. It wasn't a lot of like hyper efficiency in the offense. It was about explosives from him, about him creating offense on his own. And now he can't do that with the same efficiency, right? And now you're asking him to play in an offense that does want you to target the middle of the field, that does want you to play on time, in rhythm, get the run game going, throw big throws off of that. No, he can still throw the deep ball. That still is clearly there. But all the little stuff in between, I just don't think is going to be efficient enough for him to hold on to the job when you have a guy that, he's probably not going to be super efficient doing that stuff either, but he can run 4-4 and will just run past the defense if he needs to. Like, that's kind of what this all comes down to, is he has a trump card, whereas I don't think Wilson does anymore. And that's what I think is going to hurt him long-term with the team.
To me, Fields has something that's just that speed. Exactly.
Yeah, it's game-changing.
It's something that scares the defense. And I don't know what Russell Wilson does that scares a defense anymore. And that's why I also think we're going to see 2 quarterbacks. Tommy, how do you think the quarterback situation is going to play out? And what have you seen from Fields in the preseason? I asked Shayne about what he's seen from Wilson, because in preseason game number 3, it was a small sample, but he actually was playing on time in structure, willing to see it and trust his eyes over the middle of the field, something that definitely didn't happen in the first 2 preseason games.
Yeah, well, first of all, Wilson starting is not going to surprise anybody. It's what we all thought was going to happen. But I agree. I think that Wilson's going to get replaced at some point. Just looking at the last several years of these guys together, I think Fields has trended in the right direction, although much slower than you would want for a former first-round quarterback, still only 25 years old, year younger than Kenny Pickett. But you want to see him trend faster in the upwards direction. Whereas Russell Wilson is 3 straight down years. I just don't have any faith that this guy who turns 36 during the 2024 season is going to be able to stick it out until the end and have impressive enough play to keep Justin Fields rotting on the bench with the tools that he has. I think that a switch is going to be made. My guess that it would be made before the bye week in week 9, if not during the bye this year. And so I do think it's going to be a split. I think that Fields is going to be the quarterback that ends up finishing out the season. As far as the preseason goes, there was things that you wanted to see both of them improve on that we didn't get to see. And quite honestly, I know that the Steelers scored a touchdown on the opening drive. I would have liked to see more Russell Wilson. Like he had a nice pass to George Pickens, but that was about it. And then Cordell Patterson took care of the rest with a 31-yard touchdown run.
Nice
and so
to see that from him.
Give him maybe more than just a series. I know it capped off the way that you wanted with a touchdown, but we didn't get to see much of him. And in the game before against Buffalo, he was bad. I mean, it was not a good game from Wilson. Looked skittish in the pocket, checked the ball down, 4.7 yards an attempt. So I want to see that improve from both of those guys. We'll see what happens in the season, but I definitely think that Fields had things he needed to work on in the preseason as well. Wasn't perfect, but like you said, Josh, did a better job this game, hanging in the pocket, making some throws. That throw to Michael Pruitt over the middle of the field got them near the goal line. Like that's the kind of stuff that you want to see more consistently from him. Because when I did go back and watch the all 22 on Fields against Buffalo, there were times when he would kind of put his eyes down and roll out of the pocket, miss some guys like trailing over the middle of the field wide open. There were those opportunities there. And that's what always scared me about him. Like, does he have a good enough field vision and accuracy to be that guy? We started trending in the right direction this last game, but ultimately, yes, I think that Fields is going to end up taking over at quarterback at some point.
And with Fields, you have to ride those highs and lows.
You do.
And there are just going to be more peaks than valleys. And you have to hope there are going to be more peaks than valleys, but there are certainly going to be higher peaks than the Russell Wilson peaks at this point in his career. And that's why I also, as I said, I expect them to play both quarterbacks at some point this year and to probably finish the year with Justin Fields as the starting quarterback. That brings me to my next pick. And it's mostly hunting ones out there at this point.
Yeah.
A lot of the leaders have been the ones where we feel confident. The leaders have been taken off the board. Well, all of the potential leaders, I guess. And that leads me to take Alex Highsmith for sacks.
Yeah.
And just go after what feels like a fairly sure thing that Highsmith's going to be second on the team in sacks. We really didn't see much from the other pass rushers on the defensive line. Obviously, the Cam Hayward injury is a big reason for that. Keanu Benton is somebody who could maybe be a force if he's able to actually get on the field enough, as much as we would like him to. Ogunjobi's actually looked pretty good in the preseason to me, but
yeah, he's been good.
I think it's a sure thing that Highsmith is going to be second on this team in sacks. And even though I've liked that from the defensive line, and Nick Herbig looks amazing.
He does. Yeah.
He looks fantastic in the preseason. And I think that gives the Steelers the flexibility to eventually move on from Alex Highsmith, but not this season.
Josh, you gave yourself an easy point there. I like the thought process.
Smart.
I'm going to go for 3. Again, it maybe. I mean, long shot here, but I want E-Rob. I want Landon Roberts at linebacker leading the Steelers in tackles in case Queen misses time. Roberts is there to clean up. And even if he doesn't, that might be an even enough split in Roberts doing enough in the box to contend in that category. So I think he's going to get me 1 point with the potential, maybe a 15% chance to get me the 3 points there.
How do you feel about Peyton Wilson in that linebacker rotation? Obviously it's going to be Queen and Roberts. It feels like there is some redundancy in terms of downhill, hard-hitting, run-stopping linebackers. How do you, Shayne, feel about what Peyton Wilson's done and what that linebacker room is going to look like?
I do think that because of Roberts' consistency as a tackler and the fact that he can be the enforcer next to Queen, he's going to play a lot of snaps. But when he does not play, it's going to be when Wilson comes off for coverage responsibilities, right?
Yeah.
So especially for the purposes of this draft, he's a guy that I would probably shy away from for tackles just because even if he plays a significant amount of snaps, it's probably going to come as a coverage player where his instincts, his speed is just more valuable than what Roberts can bring as a run defender in potential pass situations. So I think especially when you get to like third down, especially anything like 6 and above, maybe even 5 and above, I'd be surprised if there are 2 linebackers out there. It's more than likely, especially after the first couple games, going to be Queen and Wilson, in my opinion, if he's healthy.
Tommy, do you see any chance of Wilson becoming a full-time starting linebacker and potentially usurping Roberts this season?
I don't see that chance this season, just knowing the Steelers and the things that we've already talked about.
Yeah.
How long it's going to take. I mean, you had guys sitting there last year. You had a Joey Porter Jr. sitting there last year that you reportedly had a first-round grade on.
Yeah.
And it took Levi Wallace, the worst starting cornerback in the NFL, until the bye week to make the switch. And so I don't believe in Mike Tomlin and Terrell Austin enough to make that switch, even if Peyton Wilson was clearly the better player than Landon Roberts. And so that's why I went with Roberts for this exercise. I do think there's a chance that he gets the reps that he needs, enough box snaps that he needs to get those tackles. Even if it looks like Wilson should be the guy that's out there in sub package work all the time, or even out there full time, I don't think it's going to happen in year one.
No, I don't either. And the Steelers are still playing Dan Moore Jr. at left tackle. So what more do we really have to say? Shayne, your next pick.
This one is one, again, I'm searching for ones. I think the problem is I would like to do receiving here, and I'm kind of gifting you this, Josh, if you want to take it, but I have a feeling that interceptions, if it isn't Minka, so this could be a 3, but I'm still looking more for a 1. I think Dante Jackson has a really good chance to get some picks because he's going to get thrown at. Like, that's kind of what this comes down to, right? It's like, Levi Wallace had a decent amount of picks last year because they were throwing at him all the time. So eventually they're going to throw in actually to him and not the receiver 10 yards behind him. Like, that was kind of what the idea was with him, right? Like, with Dante, one, he's a better player than Wallace, obviously. I'm not the highest on Jackson in that trade, especially because of what our receiving room looks like right now. But I do think he's going to get thrown out a lot. I think he's going to play most of the snaps at the second corner if he's healthy. And when you get thrown out a lot in the NFL, you have chances to pick the ball off. So I'm just going to kind of bank on that happening for me.
So with my next pick, I have one I want to do and one I should do.
Right.
They're both receiving.
Mm-hmm.
And and I'm going to take Pat Freiermuth.
Okay.
And go for the 1.
All right. Yeah.
And not do the fun thing. I hope someone does the fun thing. The way
exactly
this draft,
what you're talking about.
Yes, the way this draft lined up for me, it doesn't make so much sense to do the fun thing right now.
No.
But I hope somebody does the fun thing at some point. It seems like Pat Freiermuth is featured a lot in this offense, is going to be featured a lot in the offense. We know Arthur Smith likes his tight ends, likes to throw to his tight ends. He likes to do it with multiple tight ends, so that might hurt Freiermuth a little bit, but he's clearly the best pass-catching tight end on this roster.
No doubt.
Not even remotely close. Darnell Washington has just not shown any development really in that area at all. Michael Pruitt is he's
an Arthur Smith guy, a veteran.
Yes, he's an Arthur Smith guy. He's a veteran. He's not going to be a featured part of this passing game. I do think that Freiermuth will be, and I think barring any surprising moves before week 1 of the NFL season, Pat Freiermuth will be second on the Pittsburgh Steelers in receiving yards.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, I can see that if he stays healthy for sure. And so, Josh, remind me now, I've got 2 categories left. I got to fill these last 2 categories, right?
Yes, I am making sure that I have everything clear. Yeah, you have to fill all of the categories.
Okay.
We can't go off the board and take multiple.
Unfortunately, you already know who your last pick is going to be.
Though it would be very fun too.
So let's do the fun thing. I'm going to do the fun thing now.
Yes.
And I'm going to take Brandon Ayuk as the Steelers leading receiver. If this trade gets done, and I heard a while back a lot of things, and so much has changed since then. I mean, know, they can leverage, they can tell you whatever they want to tell you. But I heard back then, right when Filipponi and those guys were hearing that this thing was essentially a done deal. We learned later that there was a deal on the table, and all John Lynch, the 49ers GM, had to do was give a thumbs up, basically, and it was done. A lot of back and forth over the weeks. But if this thing gets done, my favorite to lead the Steelers in receiving would be Ayuk because he's just a better route runner, has a better route tree than George Pickens. I think Pickens goes back to being the Z and is the guy that's used down the field, where you can use Ayuk as that X. I think that he outpaces Pickens in targets, and that also ultimately leads to him leading the Steelers in receiving. It's a long shot, I know, but with one of my last picks here, I'm going to go for the 3-point swing. If the trade happens, I think he's going to get me 3 points.
It was absolutely on my board. Shayne, was it on your board as well?
It was. I was gonna save it to see if I wanted to take a receiving leader later, but then I had Pickens. Like I got to be able to take Pickens. I'm like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
take Pickens. Like it's kind of too
Yeah,
easy.
that just makes a lot of sense. And no love for Van Jefferson in this group.
No.
Have we been interested at all by what we've seen from the other cast of characters around Pickens in this passing game? Because obviously I wasn't enough to take another wide receiver. I took Pat Fryermuth, and Tommy's going for a player that's just
Currently
not
not
even
on
on
the
the
team.
roster and may
Currently
never
not
be
on
on
the
the
team.
roster. And I think it's a great pick. I think it's
Yeah.
the correct pick. But
Absolutely.
Tommy, what have you seen from the wide receiver group? Is there anyone that jumps out to you? Anything that's been impressive, or are you really worried about the position?
Yeah, Josh, I'm just not going to get duped into believing that Van Jefferson is a different player than we saw like the last 3 or 4 years here. Like, I know that the camp has been good. He had a strong preseason. He's a veteran presence in the locker room there. He can run all the routes. He's reliable when it comes to hands, but this is Allen Robinson plus. And I think that that's all you're getting out of Van Jefferson. He's not going to suddenly become a different player at this stage in his career. And so that's why I went with the upside swing there. I don't think there's any chance. Obviously, Jefferson leads the team in receiving and probably doesn't even come in second, because I think that they're going to find other options more enjoyable. Maybe a Calvin Austin, maybe a Roman Wilson once he suddenly finds his way on the field and working his way up the ladder here. So I didn't trust any of those names enough to not swing at Ayuk at least. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
So, Shayne, I have a weird theory about George Pickens, specifically in this Arthur Smith offense, that is very timing based and very over the middle. And like Ryan Tannehill was great at it because he would get back there, grip it and rip it, and trust that his receiver was going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
George Pickens is a very unconventional route runner.
Yes.
He has talked about this. Kevin Clark, of when he was at the Ringer, now at ESPN, wrote a great story about like George Pickens is an unconventional dude. He's also an unconventional route runner on the field. He does a lot of different things, and his plan is just to get open. Will just getting open actually work in this offense where you kind of need to be at a spot at a right time for the quarterback to trust his eyes? Because that's one of the arguments I could make for Ayuk. He's already in that type of offense and thriving in it.
The thing I would say is that under normal circumstances, if you had quarterbacks that fit the system, yes, I would be concerned about it. However, I think the only chance this team is productive in the passing game is if one of these quarterbacks breaks out of the pocket and throws a ball 50 yards down the field. So I don't really know if it matters that much, unfortunately. I kind of wish it did matter, but I almost have to say, like, okay, like, yeah, Pickens is a weird player. He's one of the more unique receivers we've seen in a long time, but he's really good at doing that, and it works for him. I think the Arthur Smith eventually is going to be like, well, what else am I supposed to do? Am I going to throw the ball to Van Jefferson 10 times a game? I'm not doing
just because he's on time. Yeah.
Right. So it's like, that's not going to happen. My quarterback's probably not going to throw the ball on time anyway. So, like, all right, Pickens, go save us, basically. It's 3rd and 10. We'll figure something out. Like, that's what I think is ultimately going to happen. Now, if you add Ayuk to that equation, then yes, because of the fact that he is able to do those things, because he is a better route runner, he's going to be an easier guy to pepper with targets, right? That's kind of the big concern with Pickens is how many targets can you give this guy when like 50% of the targets aren't going to make any sense because he's not even running the route he's probably supposed to be running. Like, that's the concern with him. But again, when you look at the rest of the talent on this roster, outside of Fryermuth, nobody else really approaches his talent level. And it just, at the end of the day, you have to go with him until you introduce something else to the offense.
So yeah, Shayne, I think looking at the Steelers personnel, you can make an argument that this team should just play backyard football.
They probably
everything
should.
on the fly, like play breaks down, scrambling around and finding a way to get open. Like, that's what their team looks like. So I completely get that argument.
Yeah,
I think Bruce Arians would love having this and just deep shots constantly.
Yeah,
and let the quarterback
Austin running from the slot up the seam.
Make some plays and give them that freedom to just constantly push the ball down the field. Arthur Smith's probably not going to do that. No. But I think that brings us to Shayne's pick. Am I correct? I don't want to get lost in this draft here. I'm trying to keep up with everything.
So I have sacks left and I believe rushing yards leader left. So rushing yards leader, I'm pretty much out on that one. I don't think I'm getting any points because unless Warren is hurt for like a long time, Patterson probably isn't approaching either their production. So I'm going to take a swing on second for sacks, and it's going to be Herbig. I mean, because again, like Highsmith would have to probably get hurt. TJ would definitely have to get hurt if it's not Highsmith then, right? Because then Herbig's going to play a lot then. But we've seen like he can he can just win quickly. And when you can win quickly in the NFL, if you play enough snaps, you can rack up 10, 11, 12 sacks on not that many snaps. Like we've seen it before with other guys like him that are kind of that designated pass rusher type. Now the Steelers, considering they like playing their edge rushers 90% of the snaps for some reason, I still can't figure out what their thought process is there. It's not like it's hurt us at any point in the playoff games or something, like, whatever. But if he does play like 40, 50% of the snaps somehow in whatever way, like I think he could rack up enough sacks to potentially at least be second, if not even first, if it really goes bad for us. So
Tommy, what do you think Nate Herbig out for the season with a shoulder injury? What do you think Nick Herbig could do in terms of production if he just played as a full-time starting edge rusher in this defense?
I love that hypothetical because this guy has been so good since day one. And we knew how good he was at Wisconsin, like graded out really well, extremely productive over his final 2 seasons with the Badgers, had 20 sacks and 30 tackles for a loss. It's translating. Like everything that we're seeing is translating. It doesn't matter that he came in at 6'2" and 240 pounds. Like he is just a pass rusher. He finds a way to get to the quarterback. So if he was able to now in year 2, still a really young guy, entered the league at 20 years old, but in year 2 now, able to just tee off on the quarterback full time and not have to come off the bench and be part of the rotation, I wouldn't be shocked if he had like an 11 sack season. Like I think that he's that good that he could be that Hassan Reddick type guy. Like I don't care if that's a bold take. I'm going to go out there and say that I think he should have been a much higher draft pick. I think he was phenomenal. Like his college tape is phenomenal. His NFL tape has been excellent so far, at least as a pass rusher. And so everything is falling in line. We're seeing this could be that pass rush specialist for the Steelers. So yeah, I definitely think he could.
And I think we all should just take a second and thank the great state of Wisconsin for a second. I think Watt, Benton, now Herb, and Tom, you and I talked about during that draft. You know how much I love both of these players. Of course, I am a Wisconsin fan, admittedly. I'll say that. Despite the fact that I also do stuff for another Big Ten rival, but whatever. The point is that Wisconsin defenders, for whatever reason, specifically if the Steelers draft them, are just awesome. So, Isaiah Loudermilk was standing. I even said, let's not do that. Even I was willing to say, don't do that. But in general, we owe a lot to the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah. I asked that hypothetical, Tommy, because I would be ready to get pretty irresponsible with my predictions about what a Nick Herbig season would look like if he was the full-time starter, like pushing 15 sacks and feeling fairly good about it. I have been just completely blown away by him in the preseason and in limited time last season, last preseason. There hasn't been a moment when he hasn't really been impressive. So I think there's a lot of upside with that pick. And it brings me to my next pick, I believe. And forgive me for not having myself organized. I have interceptions left and tackles left. And I am going to take Minkah Fitzpatrick for tackles.
Ooh, okay.
Just on the possibility that they keep him around the line of scrimmage, even though it's not what's best for him as a player, and on the possibility that maybe this linebacking group isn't as great as we think it is, which I do see as a possibility.
Me too.
Because Patrick Queen was not Patrick Queen until Roquan Smith showed up in Baltimore. And Roquan Smith is decidedly not on this Pittsburgh Steelers defense. I'd be a lot higher on them if he was on that side of the ball. So I'm going to take Minkah Fitzpatrick and see if I can sneak a point out there in the tackles department.
Yeah, I think that's warranted. Yeah, if he plays the full season, he's going to be up there in that category at least.
I think like one Elliott injury, and he might lead the team in tackles realistically. Like because they're going to just be like, yeah, Minkah, you're just going to have to do all sorts of stuff. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
like it's just too much.
Tommy, who would have been your next tackles pick? You already took tackles. You both already took tackles. Who would have been your next if not Minkah?
That's a good question. I think I would have to go Minkah because I think otherwise you're banking on an injury to a linebacker to make Peyton Wilson potentially that guy. And I just don't trust that that's going to end up happening. Definitely not early enough in the season. He'll probably be too far behind the pace at that point. So I think Minkah is the right choice for that. Yeah.
I think a sneaky one would be whoever plays the most snaps at slot corner because they might just get thrown at a lot.
Yeah.
You might just have to tackle people a lot. Like, unfortunately, like that might just like kind of the same thing with interceptions. For
If
you.
Levi Wallace was still here and you want to rack up the solo tackles, like I remember there's a year William Gay got like 99 solo.
Oh yeah, it's insane.
Target
Yeah, because he was just like peppering them with targets. It's like I'll tackle him though. It's like all right, it's fine.
Well, there's not certainty that slot corner this year is actually going to be able to make the tackle after they're targeted.
That's the problem. So
we'll have to see how that position plays out. Tommy, your last pick, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. My last one here. I don't love my chances of getting a singular point here. It's not happening. But I've got passing wide open. Obviously, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields off the board. I got to go with Kyle Allen. If the Steelers get to a situation where they have to use Kyle Allen, the season is over. I'll go as far as to say that.
No Mike Tomlin magic is stopping that, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're down to a Mason Rudolph desperation scenario where you got to call upon Allen. Unless it's just for a game and then somebody can get back on the field. Right. That would be the only way. There's no chance that it comes in even second in this department. So I'm going to take Allen here because what other choice do I have?
You essentially ended up with like the no running backs fantasy football strategy of waiting as long as possible because everyone else already has theirs. And
what's funny though is there's one particular scenario that I could see you somehow getting a point, Tommy, and it's Russell Wilson is playing awesome football the whole year, right? And it's like we're getting to the end of the season, he gets banged up, and then Justin Fields comes in and he immediately also gets hurt, right? And now it's just now we have to go to Kyle Allen, and he plays the rest of that game, and maybe he has to start the next game because they're both still hurt, but then Wilson gets back first. And then Fields doesn't play at all, basically. So that's pretty much your scenario.
That's what you for some points in this situation. I won't say hoping for because you do still have those Steelers jerseys up on the wall behind you.
Yeah.
So there's no amount of hoping that Kyle Allen sees the field.
But it's possible. I will give you that much. It's at least possible.
Yeah. So Shayne, your final pick?
Mine is rushing yards leader, which also someone will have to get hurt and like long term, not just Warren being banged up.
Well, I will say before you make your pick, not to aid in this situation.
I know what you're thinking.
You do have a theory that a certain quarterback is going to start for the majority of the season.
That is true. You got me there. That is the one thing I've been debating about because my thing is if he is if he's in the quarterback position for 10 games, right? He's probably going to run for about 500 to 600 yards is what my guess would be. Yeah, because he's going to have to do it a lot. Is that enough to be second on the team? Even if that's my thing is I think an injury would still be to one of the running back would still be my best shot of getting a point here because I expect whoever the top two running backs this year to be are going to eclipse that amount in my opinion. So for me, just taking a shot at one point, I'm going to say Patterson. That's Warren gets hurt obviously, and Patterson hey, I know it was one run, but he still got some juice. He might get in there sometimes, and if he's a part-time player for half the season, then Warren or Najee go down, he might be able to rack up enough the rest of the way. So I'll take Patterson. Fields withstanding, but I'm not going to bank on that too much.
Yeah, there was a hope for me that somebody was gonna. I mean, I guess I took Minka for tackles, and we have Minka for interception. So I was just enjoying the double player for multiple different categories with this type of draft. And that leads me to interceptions, and I'll just go with Joey Porter Jr. and hope he's a bona fide, legitimate cornerback one. And maybe there aren't a lot of targets that go his way, but with his go-go gadget arms, he might be able to pluck a couple interceptions and be, a true alpha number one cornerback that we can rely on in years going forward. So he's going to be out there enough to potentially be in the mix for interceptions. So I'll take JPJ. Tommy, where do you see his development going in year two? Is just how I'll ask that question.
I think a lot of his development at this point hinges on if he can clean up the grabbiness a little bit. I know you can't get away with that forever unless you're Richard Sherman. And so Porter's got to find a way to ease off a little bit there. I think that he'll end up doing that. He'll get it. But this is the player that he is. This is how this was his bread and butter at Penn State. It was during his rookie year. If he ends up being that bona fide cornerback one, it's because you are a lockdown cornerback. It's not because you're one that takes the ball away 6 or 7 times in a season. That's not going to be his MO. But I think I agree with your choice though, Josh, because he is a 100 percentile snap player. He is going to play every single snap. And so just the math of it tells you, because he's going to be out there on the field for 1,000+ snaps this year, he has a good chance of finishing in the top 3 in the interceptions category. I think a sneaky one for this one would have been a Peyton Wilson right here, just because of
I
his
did have
ball
him on my
skills
list for interceptions.
and just soaking up the middle of the field in passing situations. If the Steelers use him in that way, a chance to play that robber role a little bit there as well. So, but I do think that that's a good play on your part.
So that brings us to the end of the draft. Thank you guys for participating in this. And I think it's a great way to just talk about who's really going to be featured in the new Arthur Smith offense, who's going to be, what Patrick Queen's going to be on this defense, because the Steelers are going to look a good bit different this year compared to last year, compared to the year before. It seems like they're in a constant state of reconfiguration over this era, and that makes sense given where they're at the quarterback position, especially. So I think it's a really fun exercise to see who's going to dominate for this team. And thank you guys for playing along with it.
Absolutely.
Yep, no problem. Thanks.
So make sure everyone to check out their great show on Wednesdays. It'll be Wednesday at 1:30. Tommy and Shayne doing great stuff on the Still Curtain podcast. And then be back with me next Tuesday, because we have Labor Day next Monday. It'll be next Tuesday at 1:30 for another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. Until then, have a good week and go Steelers.